All right, it's time. Live Panther-Lair Post-Game show here on a Saturday afternoon, a snowy Saturday afternoon in the city of Pittsburgh. I don't know how the weather is in Louisville, but it is snowing here. It's a winter wonderland in Pittsburgh, and your Pitt Panthers have their first ACC win of the season with an 83-70 victory at Louisville. Panthers beat the worst team in the ACC, but they beat them on the road and beat them by 13, and I think that counts for a whole lot. I'm probably going to repeat that a lot. That's going to probably be my mantra here during the post-game show is that, no, it's not that impressive to beat Louisville, but if you go on the road against a conference team and win by double digits, you win by 13, then you can at least say you're better than that team. I think a game like today, and I probably shouldn't get into the big picture implications just yet since we're just getting started here, but I think a game like today is one where you can prove that if nothing else, you're not going to prove that you're the top, in the top 6 of the league, or maybe even the top 7 or so. Well, maybe around there. You're not going to prove that you're in the top 3 of the league. You're probably not going to prove that you're in the top 5 of the league, but you're going to prove that you're not in the bottom 5 of the league. You're going to prove that you're not, maybe not even a bottom half team, because even though Louisville's the worst team in the conference, they're terrible already. They're going to be terrible this year. They were terrible last year. They don't look any better. They struggled again today. They committed a lot of turnovers. They could never stop Pitt's runs. When Pitt went on a run, Louisville, it looked like once or twice that they had an answer, and a little bit in the first half they did, but they were never able to really to completely cut it off, and they were never able to build their own run. Pitt was able to get big shots today from Zach Austin. Bub Carrington made shots. Blake Hinson made shots. There's a lot of storylines to talk about in this game, but ultimately Louisville's bad. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad win when you go on the road in conference play and win by a baker's dozen. So Pitt gets the win. They improved to 10-5. They are 1-3 in the ACC, and they stopped the bleeding a little bit. Stopped the bleeding a little bit from the back-to-back losses to Syracuse and North Carolina, and now they've kind of reset themselves and playing without one of their veteran guards, who I think they're relying on to provide more than he has in recent weeks with Ishmael Leggett being out. So a lot to talk about with this game. This is the Panther-Lair Post-Game. This is what we're going to do is talk about this game, talk about Pitt-Louisville, what you saw, what stood out to you, what you think. And, of course, we'll have our back and forth. You remember how we did these during the football season with the comments during the chat screen there on the right-hand side of your screen? You put your comment, you put your question there, and it's like a call-in show, basically, except we can't hear your voice. We're just going to read your words. I will read your words. If you want me to do a funny voice or a certain kind of voice, I could do that, but mostly I'll probably just read your comment or your question and then answer it, and we'll talk. We'll talk back and forth about what we saw today out of Pitt-Louisville and what we see going forward for the Panthers now that they got a win. And like I say, we're able to break that losing streak, of the Syracuse and Carolina games to get their first conference win and maybe build a little confidence. Not that I necessarily think they were lacking in confidence, but build something to build forward as they roll through conference play. We'll be keeping an eye out for any breaking news that might come up, not necessarily on the basketball front. That's a possibility as sitting out there. So we may have, I might be checking the phone every now and then just to see if anything has popped up. But there's, I think, certainly a possibility. So we'll be keeping an eye out for breaking news here, and maybe this will turn from a basketball post-game show into a bit of a discussion of something else. But we'll follow the news as it goes. You know what we always ask you to do, though? Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's a place where we have all of our Pitt video content, daily morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 p.m., kind of like this format where we interact, we talk back and forth. And we have Jim Hammett from Panther-Lair.com on as well. So it'll be me and him and you talking about Pitt sports. And then these post-game shows that we're doing weekend road games, I think generally, maybe all road games. Maybe we'll do post-game shows after every road game. It's a little bit tough with the home games, particularly this one coming up that's like a 9 o'clock tip-off. We're not doing a live show after that. I'm not going to get home until after midnight. But we do it all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You can make sure you don't miss any of it by subscribing to the YouTube channel. And then, as I say, we have a back and forth here with the chat screen. If you want to make sure your comment gets read or your question gets answered, you could be a super chatter. You go right down to the bottom of the screen there. There's a little dollar sign at the bottom of the chat. You can click that, kick a couple bucks to the podcast. We appreciate your support, and we will definitely read your comment or your question. And our good friend Michael B. started us off with started us off with a super chat, and we appreciate him. Says, hi, Chris, couple of questions. Do you think Pitt will make a postseason tournament? Also, do you think Jalen Lowe is going to play a more prominent role on this team? And if so, whose minutes does he replace? Well, I'll take the second one first. With Jalen Lowe, I mean, we saw him play. What did he end up with? I should have the stat sheet just right here in front of me. Jalen Lowe played 27 minutes today, which I think is probably a season high. I know he got into 24 minutes the other day in the Carolina game. And I would assume that 27 is a career high. I might have to look that up. Obviously he replaced minutes today. He replaced Ishmael Leggett. With Ishmael Leggett not playing today, my assumption is due to the shoulder injury that he suffered in the Syracuse game, and that probably limited his shooting a little bit in the North Carolina game. I think that kept him out today. I'm assuming it's that same injury. Although you never entirely know. Did you catch a quick aside where they mentioned that Jorge Diaz-Graham has been dealing with an ankle injury? That's the first I don't remember hearing it. Maybe Jeff Capel said it when I wasn't around or something, but that's the first I remember hearing of Jorge having an ankle injury. So sometimes these injuries sort of slide under the radar. Ishmael Leggett has something. I'm assuming it's the shoulder that was limiting him last week, or limiting him in the North Carolina game, the injury he suffered against Syracuse. I'm assuming that's what kept him out. But that's where Jalen Lowe's minutes came from today. And it was interesting because he had the 27 minutes, but I want to say most of that was in the first half. Let me get the first half, second half breakdown. You had 18 minutes in the first half, 9 minutes in the second half. And I think you saw those numbers go down because they were looking for length. You saw a lot of those lineups with one guard, with just Bub Carrington on the court, with Zach Austin, Blake Hinson, and both Diaz-Graham twins, or sometimes I think there might have been an occasion with Jorge and Federico. Maybe not. Maybe it was always. And actually, there was a little bit where there was like 1 second after Bub Carrington got hurt. There was 1 second of gameplay where it was Jalen Lowe with those four bigs, with Austin, Hinson, and the two Diaz-Graham twins. See, where I run into trouble with that lineup is there was a point where they had Jorge and Federico out there together. Actually, for a decent chunk of time, they went with that. Probably about 2 minutes or so, they went with that lineup. See, I write down the lineups as we play, and I generally write them like in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whoever the point guard is. When you have Bub Carrington plus Zach Austin, Blake Hinson, and the Diaz-Graham twins, who do you write as the 2 guard in that spot? I wrote 55. I assumed it was Austin, but I'm not really sure who you count. But they definitely wanted length in the second half. They wanted to go with that long lineup, partially for the zone, but I just think they felt like they were getting what they wanted and taking advantage of Louisville's lack of length by putting all those guys on the court. So Lowe's minutes fell a little bit there. He played 18 in the first half, so he was on pace for damn near 40 minutes, right? 36 minutes, which that's a ton. That's a ton of playing time. Obviously, I don't want to say benefited, but obviously he got extra minutes because Leggett was out. Going forward, if Leggett is healthy, prior to today, I would have said Lowe's extra minutes will come at the expense of whoever plays the 3 spot. You know what I mean? Or just at the expense of Leggett. That Leggett's minutes will take a little bit of a dip, or maybe Bub Carrington's minutes would level out just a little bit, and he wouldn't necessarily play 35 minutes every night, but maybe play 33, 32, 31. And so 3 or 4 minutes of those would go to Jalen Lowe, and then maybe Leggett loses 3 or 4 minutes here or there, and Lowe adds, an easy 6 to 8 minutes right there, just with a slight reduction for Carrington and Leggett. That's what I would have said. And I also would have said that, some of his minutes will come from whoever's playing the 3 because they're getting nothing out of the 3. Well, then today they got something out of the 3. They got a lot out of the 3. They got a great game out of Zach Austin. 20 points Austin finished with. On 7 of 13 shooting, he made 4 3-pointers. I want to bring up his whole stat line. 4 3-pointers. He had 3 rebounds, 3 assists, 1 foul, 1 block, and 4 steals. Zach Austin stuffing the stat sheet, playing 38 minutes, acting like he's at High Point again. At High Point, he actually had 12 20-point games. This is his first 20-point game at Pitt. His season high, I think previously he scored 19. He got up to 20 today. And if he can play like that, and I'm not saying that you need 20 points out of Zach Austin every game, but you need him to be active and engaged. 4 steals and a block. You need that kind of defensive performance. You need the fast break dunks that he was getting today. The backdoor cuts for an easy dunk that he was getting. He doesn't need to make 4 3-pointers every game. 2 would be fine. 2 of 5. If Zach Austin shoots 2 of 5 from 3 and makes like 3 dunks, either in transition or with a quick cut, that's a great game for him. What would that be? 11 points? No. 12 points? That's a great game for Zach Austin on the regular. And I think it's something you can fit into this team and still get everything you need out of, you know what I mean? You can still get a big production out of Blake Hinson. You can still get great production out of Carrington. You can get rising production out of guys like Jalen Lowe and Guillermo Diaz-Graham. But as we talk about other scoring options for this team, and we talked about it before we knew Ishmael Leggett was injured and wasn't going to play today, and I feel like we talked about it on Wednesday night on the live show. We talked about it in a bunch of different places about that other scoring option of who's going to rotate in and be one of the top 4 scorers. If Hinson, Carrington, Leggett are going to be 3 of your top 4 scorers on most nights, which is how it should be, and maybe we need to change that a little bit and rethink it with the way Leggett's been playing, and especially if he's going to be hurt. But somebody else is going to round out kind of the top 4 primary scorers on most nights. And if Zach Austin could give you that 2 threes and 3 dunks, I mean, there's your guy. That's your guy, and that changes the complexion of this team and how they score and how they can attack you. Because if you have him outside as another shooting threat, you have him outside as another viable 3-point threat, or like realistic option to make threes from outside, now it's that much more difficult to run Blake Hinson off the line. It's that much more difficult to guard those pick and rolls. It's that much more difficult to really defend all the things that Pitt wants to do. If you have that other scoring option, and then the fact that he can draw a defender out and then cut to the hoop for a lob or a quick bounce pass and a dunk. He's so athletic, and he's been one of the more frustrating players for Pitt this season because he just hasn't been able to capitalize on what's clearly some really impressive natural talents, the things that made him so enticing for the Pitt coaches. We talked about him being a taller Nike Sabandi. We talked all summer about how they didn't have a guy like this, a guy with his athleticism who could shoot a little bit from the outside, who had his size, could defend 1 through 5. We talked about that. And then for the first, this was game 15. So the first, most of the first 14 games of the season, it still didn't seem like they had a guy like that. Well, he showed up today. And maybe that's a product of playing Louisville, but whatever it takes. And maybe this is a game that serves as a jumping off point for him, where he gets that feeling again of being a primary contributor for a winning team. Maybe this is a game that gives him that boost and he can turn it into, again, not 20-point games every night, not 4 of 9 from 3 every night, not, a block and 4 steals every night, but, 9 to 12 points. Probably like more than 3 rebounds out of him. But 9 to 12 points, 6 to 8 rebounds, a block or 2, a steal or 2. Like, that's a great game for Zach Austin. That's exactly what Pitt needs from Zach Austin. And tonight he just happened to come up, or today he just happened to come up big in a game where his scoring was huge for this team. I mean, he's had as much to do with this win as anybody and maybe more. Let's see. Got a lot of comments and questions here. We appreciate everybody. If we want to make sure we get to your comment or your question, we can. You can be a super chatter. What I have to say. And I said this on Twitter. I was describing the live stream and what we do. It's like we did during football season. But the other thing we did during football season, I thought we should bring it back, just because it's since they were playing in Louisville, right? They were playing in Kentucky, so figure we should break out the old Pennsylvania bourbon because, Pitt beat Louisville in Kentucky. I know it's only like 2:30 in the afternoon, but I mean, you got to start sometime, right? So let's pour one out here into the glass, not on the table. Let's pour one out here since Pitt went to Kentucky and got a win. We'll shout them out with some David E. Where is this place from? I forget what this is even called. Hidden Still Spirits, Pennsylvania Straight Bourbon Whiskey. So, to Zach Austin and to near perfect free throw shooting. I don't think I've gotten the bourbon out since the Duke game. Duke football. Free throws. Raise your hand if you had this team making 19 consecutive free throws to open the game. I did not see that coming. I suspect you did not see that coming. And when it came down to it, Pitt finished 19 of 21 from the free throw line. And you want to talk about reasons they won this game. You want to talk about big moments in this game or big performances in this game or just what separated Pitt in this game. How about that? 19 of 21 from the free throw line. Now, 12 of 34 from three doesn't hurt. Getting a couple of 20-point scores and another guy scoring 16 doesn't hurt. Only committing 11 turnovers doesn't hurt. Only having 18 fouls, honestly, is pretty good. 15 assists on 26 field goals. I mean, this was a good all-around game for Pitt. And the kind of performance that they needed. They even won the rebounding battle, although only by one, 28-27. This was... Oh, they also forced 18 turnovers and scored 28 points off of those turnovers. So, I mean, a lot of stats favor Pitt here, but with what we've seen from this team all season, making 19 free throws in a row and finishing 19 of 21 looms pretty large. They only got 7 more points off the free throw line than Louisville did, so that wasn't entirely the difference in a 13-point game, but it was a pretty big one. Converting from the line, Blake Hinson, 8 of 8. Jorge Diaz-Graham, 5 of 5. Bub Carrington, 2 of 2. Zach Austin, 2 of 2. And then Jalen Lowe and Guillermo Diaz-Graham, both 1 of 2. I think you missed the front end of a 1-and-1. I think that was Guillermo's miss. So you had another point that you left out there. I think Lowe was the first one. He missed the second shot on a 1-and-1 opportunity. He made the first one. But just, that was the kind of game this was. A lot of things worked for Pitt. And I think they did a lot of things well. You know what I mean? I think they played the kind of game they need to play on most nights. 35% from three while taking like 30. That's about where they need to be. Really efficient inside the arc. What's the math there? 14 of 23 from inside the arc. They scored 22 points in the paint. They capitalized on turnovers. They grabbed 11 offensive rebounds. And again, limited their own turnovers. It was a good all-around game for Pitt. And the kind of game they need to have, particularly against a lesser opponent. Donnie Lightning is a super chatter, so we're going to go to you right off the bat, Donnie. Says, I'm crazy to think this team is more talented and more entertaining than last year's team, but just isn't as good. Could the ACC being better this year also be a factor? I think... It's tough to compare last year and this year. I mean, they're very different teams, obviously. One thing that I think is a separator between the two teams, between last year's Pitt team and this year's Pitt team, and I thought it a lot after the North Carolina game, a little bit the Syracuse game, although the Syracuse game had turnover issues and free throw issues that were really the biggest reason they lost that game. But the North Carolina game, what really stood out to me is they just weren't able... They just didn't have someone who could make that shot to end a run. They didn't have someone who could just take the ball and make the shot to end the run. And I think they have players capable of making those shots. But they just haven't established themselves the way Jamarius Burton and Nelly Cummings did last year. I think Nelly Cummings and Jamarius Burton, more often than not, were reliable for getting a run-ending basket. Of just give me the ball. I'm going to dribble in. I'm going to pull up for a mid-range jumper that is just going to. It may not win us the game, but it's going to stop this little 6-0 run or this 8-0 run. And this year's team hasn't shown that they've got someone who can do that consistently. Blake Hinson is a monster from outside, and he'll make threes that accomplish that goal, but it's not a consistent run stopper. That guy on the screen that was just on the screen for a second ago, Bub Carrington has a chance to be that guy. I think Jalen Lowe has a chance to be that guy. And I'm not even talking about waiting until next season for them to be that guy. I think they can be that guy this season. I think they can grow into those roles this season. And I think Carrington and Lowe made some jumpers. There was actually a spot in the second half. The Mike James guy made right around the 13-minute mark, 12-minute mark, made a pair of threes that cut it to 55-47. And Bub Carrington went down to the other end and just made a pull-up jumper and cut off a run. And that was the kind of thing they needed, because they were up 14 and now all of a sudden they're up 8. Like, Louisville cuts down the lead by making back-to-back threes. Bub Carrington goes down, takes the ball, and makes a pull-up jumper to just calm it back down. You know what I mean? Don't let the other team get that momentum. Don't let them start getting fired up, particularly on the road. You need to be able to make those baskets. And I think Burton was able to make those baskets. I think Cummings was able to make those baskets. This team is still trying to find that consistently. If they had that against North Carolina on Tuesday night, I think they have a real chance of winning that game. If they're able to just cut off a couple of those runs, because and it's also not just cutting off runs, it's also capitalizing on your own runs. I mean, when you look at the first 6.5 minutes of that Carolina game, where Pitt was like 3 of 12 or whatever from the floor and 0 of 7 from 3, I mean, they needed somebody who could make a few baskets there to build a run. And that to me is the biggest thing that's missing from last year's team to this year's team. I think last year's team was a little bit of a better shooting team just because you had Hinson and Greg Elliott. This year they obviously have Hinson. They haven't shown yet that they've got another Greg Elliott type of sniper. I think the idea this year was that they would be able to do it with more group production from outside the arc, where it would be Hinson plus Austin would make some, and Leggett would make some, and Carrington would make some, and Lowe would make some. And then you get one from the Twins or something. As opposed to Hinson would make a lot and Elliott would make a lot, and then, maybe you'd get a little bit from Cummings or Burton, or, they don't have the two big snipers this year. They have the one big sniper and then a lot of other guys. And I think they're still trying to figure out how to get that production. So I think for the most part, at least at the top end, last year's team was a better shooting team. I think this year's team can attack you in a lot of ways. And attack you in a lot of different ways. I think Guillermo Diaz-Graham's emergence as an offensive weapon has been, big in terms of broadening the arsenal that they've got. If Zach Austin can build off of today, and again, not have another 20-point game, he doesn't need to have another 20-point. Although if he wants to have another 20-point game, that'd be great, but he doesn't need to. But if Zach Austin can build off of this game and find his role, which he talked about a couple weeks ago after he got benched, that he's sort of finding his role. It was a feeling out process. If Carrington and Lowe keep growing and developing, which I think they do, I think you can look at the last 4 games at least and see those guys game after game after game growing and becoming more and more confident on the court, more and more effective on the court, and just more and more dangerous on the court. Jalen Lowe was 3 of 6 from the floor today. It didn't feel like he missed a shot. It really didn't. I thought he was it just seemed like everything he put up went down. 3 of 6 from the floor, 2 of 3 from 3, made a free throw, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. Great game from Jalen Lowe. Bub Carrington had one of his more efficient games of the season, really. It was 16 points on 6 of 10 shooting, 2 of 5 from 3. He had 6 rebounds and 5 assists. I mean, another great game, I think, from those two freshmen who I wrote about it in the 3-2-1 column yesterday. That I think the emergence of the freshmen over the last couple of games, when you looked at the Syracuse and North Carolina games, they combined to score 56 points, 14 rebounds, 13 assists. And then you add in another 25 points today, another 12 rebounds, and another 8 assists. I'll do the math later, but over the course of 3 games, I mean, those guys are really coming into their own. And they always say, by the time you get to mid-January, freshmen aren't freshmen anymore. They've played so much. Well, we're seeing that growth. We didn't have to see freshmen grow last year. Saw it a little bit with the Twins and maybe Federico, but not like we're seeing it with these freshman guards right now. Last year's guards were just, they arrived, they were fully formed. They arrived fully formed, and there was no growth really that Burton and Elliott and Cummings needed to make. Lowe and Carrington obviously had to grow. They came in as young freshmen. But now, as we sit here on January 6th, they have grown. And I think you're seeing them play really, really well, and their numbers just keep getting better. And I don't think I don't think they've reached the ceiling. I don't even think they're close to their ceiling or close to the ceiling they can reach this year. And I'm not just basing this on what they did against the worst team in the ACC. they played pretty well on Tuesday night against, one of, if not the best team in the ACC. I think they are the best team in the ACC now, right? Didn't North Carolina beat Clemson today? If my internet worked, I could bring up the score sheet, but I'm pretty sure that's what I was seeing. Or maybe it's just ESPN's website that doesn't work. North Carolina beat Clemson 65-55. So, Carolina, best team in the ACC, and I think Carrington and Lowe played really well against those guys. All right, let's get through some more comments and questions here. See what you guys are talking about, what you have on your minds as we come out of this Pitt win over Louisville on the road. And I don't think we can totally overlook or underestimate the noteworthiness of going on the road in conference play and winning by 13. Homer Simpson says, really happy to see Zach Austin finally having that big game. He played all-around great basketball today. I'm just hoping they use this game to get back into a rhythm. I think, Jim, in our staff picks today that we published on Panther-Lair.com, and I was going to use this, but Jim used it first. Jim called it a get-right game, and that's absolutely what it was. It would have been a true get-right game if it had been at home. It would have been sort of a perfect scenario. They did have to go on the road, and you can say what you want about the crowd at the KFC Yum Center or anything like that, but I learned a long time ago that in all but the most extreme cases, the only real upsets in conference basketball play, college basketball play in conference games, is when the road team wins. You have your very high-end teams and your very low-end teams, and if the very low-end team wins anywhere, that's probably an upset, and if the very high-end team loses anywhere, that's probably an upset. But like teams 3 through 12 or so, if they're facing each other and the road team wins, that's an upset, kind of regardless of where teams are or where they're ranked, just because it's hard to win on the road in conference play, even when you're playing the worst team in the league and one of the worst teams in college basketball, or at least high major teams, and maybe you could go into the mid majors and maybe low majors to find another team. So it's not easy to win on the road, and so because of the opponent, this presented an opportunity for a get-right game, and I think Pitt did get right. I think Blake Hinson got right. I thought Blake Hinson was selective in his shots. I know Jeff Capel sort of excused Blake Hinson forcing the three-point attempts on Tuesday night against North Carolina, because he said, we've seen Blake hit those shots. Even when he forces it and it looks like a bad shot, we've seen him hit those shots, and then he gets going and the team gets going and everything like that. But I don't think he did that today. I think Hinson was pretty selective in the shots he took. I mean, I know he still finished with 9 3-point attempts, which actually feels like a low number for him, although I guess he averaged 7 per game over the past 3 games. But I didn't think he really forced them. I think he took good shots. I mean, maybe only 1 or 2 out of those 9 were forced. Some just didn't go in. But even just making 3, I think, is big for Hinson. He made 3 over the last 3 games combined. And so to go out there and go 3 for 9 today, that's a Blake Hinson type of game. You'd prefer it to be like 3 of 7 would be kind of ideal. But 21 points on 5 of 14 shooting, 3 of 9 from beyond the arc, 8 of 8 from the free throw line, which is not always his strength, I think is big. That's a good game for Blake Hinson to have. I think that's a good game for him to bounce back. It's get right. You talk about a game where you're getting right. I think it was a good game for him to get right, and ideally that extends to the rest of the team, to the rest of the Panthers as they move forward here. Josh Newark says, shoveling snow, drinking Kentucky bourbon, and listening to Chris Peak. Doesn't get better than that. I appreciate you, Josh. I am not outside shoveling snow, but I am drinking Pennsylvania bourbon. Keep it in the Commonwealth, my man. Kurt46 says Lowe played really well. Yeah, he did. I'm really impressed with how Jalen Lowe has progressed. I think, and this was a long time ago, but when the season started and Bub Carrington had the triple-double, and everyone was excited about Bub Carrington, and rightfully so, because he's a really good player. When it looked like Lowe was going to be overshadowed for his freshman season, but he's just sort of kept his head down, kept working, and just sort of quietly is like, oh, by the way, guys, I can make shots. I can make a lot of shots. I can drive and finish. I can hit pull-up shots. Pull-up jumpers. I can shoot threes. I'm actually a pretty good little player, and there's no doubt about it. And they are better, I think, when he's out there. Oftentimes when he's playing with Carrington, there's going to have to be, when if there comes a point where everybody's healthy and Leggett's ready to go and Carrington and Lowe are still humming along, Jeff Capel's going to have to find different ways to mix and match with those guys. You're not going to be able to play. Like I said, Lowe played 27 minutes today. Carrington played all 40. He came out for 1 second of game time after he got bumped or whatever happened there. It was like the 3:03 mark he came out. I think Pitt inbounded the ball at the other end or something, and at the 3:02 mark, Lowe was fouled, and after that, Carrington came back in. So we really only missed 1 second of the game. You're not going to be able to do that every night. Like I said, Lowe played 18 minutes in the first half. You're not going to be able to play him 36 minutes every night. But if you have all three guards available and they're all healthy and they're all ready to go, you can mix and match and put this guy in and move this guy out. And, even if you still want to start with Carrington and Leggett, and then your first sub is Lowe for Leggett, and then you sub Leggett for Carrington, and then you sub, you know what I mean? I maybe one of my favorite puns that I've come up with in 2024, I wrote it in the 3-2-1 column yesterday, is that Jeff Capel is going to have to play some 3-guard Monty. 3-guard Monty, get it? But he's going to have to move him around. And sometimes he'll go with all three on the court like he did in the North Carolina game. Like the final minute 41 of the first half and then the final 8:36 of the second half. He went with all three guards. He's going to have to, I think he'll do some of that. But then mostly you'll have two guards on the court, particularly if Zach Austin keeps playing well. If Zach Austin can carry over some of the momentum from today going forward, then you don't need the 3-guard lineups as often. You needed the 3-guard lineups because you weren't getting anything out of the 3 spot, right? You weren't getting anything out of the small forward spot, so you had to play 3 guards just to give yourself a chance to score. Well, if Zach Austin can provide an offensive threat, either from deep or, going to the basket, and attacking, on lobs or backdoor cuts, whatever it is, and dunking, then you're not under as much pressure to figure out how to get Carrington, Lowe, and Leggett on the court at the same time for extended periods. You can do it here and there, but you don't have to do it. You don't have to try and find ways like, how am I going to get these guys together for 25 minutes? It doesn't need to be that. It can just be 6 minutes over the course of a game, but always, but mixing and matching with those three. And so, 3 guys, over the course, splitting. Let's say you don't use all 3 together, right? Let's just say you're trying to fill 80 minutes at those 2 guard spots, split among those 3 guys, 80 minutes in a game. I don't know. You'd get probably 30 for Carrington, and that would, maybe 25 and 25 for the other 2. That would be that math. Yeah, that math works. Look at me. Maybe some split like that. And I think you'd be in pretty good shape, and you might, maybe it's 27 for Lowe and 23 for Leggett, or it's 28 for Leggett and 22 for Lowe some nights, or it's 32 for Carrington and 28 for Leggett or for Lowe and 20 for Leggett. You mix and match. That 3-guard Monty is what Jeff Capel is going to have to do, and I think he can, as Carrington and Lowe continue to progress, it'll keep, I think he'll have good options. And if Leggett can come back healthy and start being more of a threat than he's been in the last few games when maybe he's been dealing with an injury, they'll be even more dangerous. Let's see. David Allen says still a bit worried about guard depth. Bub still playing up 13 late with an injury. Yeah, guard depth is, and that's something else I wrote about yesterday when I was writing about, trying to use 3-guard lineups. You're limited in how much you can do that because you only have 3 guards. And I know Michael Hewitt is there, and I know they just put KJ Marshall on scholarship, but they were winning by a dozen in this game. and or 13 and 17, and they never really brought in any other guards. As you mentioned, 3 minutes to go, Bub Carrington's really slow to get up off the court, and he still comes in a second later, despite Pitt being ahead 14 at that point, and then 15. Carrington's still coming back in the game when you would have liked to have kept him out. So, guard depth is an issue. If they run into foul trouble or have injury issues, they are going to be kind of stuck. And there's a longer story to dig into there of how they tried to recruit other guards. They tried to get other transfers, but because of having Lowe, Carrington, Leggett, and Dior Johnson, most transfers looked at it and said, Coach, I don't see an opportunity here. I don't see the minutes that you're telling me there's going to be minutes, but I don't really see it because I know who Dior Johnson is. And I know who Carrington and Lowe are, and Leggett's coming from Rhode Island. I don't know. He scored a lot there. You're bringing him in as a transfer. Maybe, are there going to be opportunities for me? And so having Dior Johnson on the roster this summer probably cost them some opportunities with transfer guards. And then obviously by the end of the summer, Johnson is no longer on the roster, but now they don't really have an opportunity to bring somebody in. So they're sort of stuck with what they have. Now, fortunately, those guys are really good players, but they are stuck with what they have. And if they run into a situation, either foul trouble or injury, things could get dicey. Or they could go with the lineup they did today with one guard and Zach Austin, Blake Hinson, and the Diaz-Graham twins. That's always an option. Let's see. Scrolling through the comments here. Yeah, there's a few comments in here about football, and I kind of knew that would happen after Panaruzzi fired 3 assistant coaches yesterday, and a transfer quarterback from Alabama is on campus for a visit today. Look, if there's breaking news during this live stream, which we'll go for another 10 minutes or so, if there's breaking news during this live stream, we'll talk about it. Otherwise, I'm going to try to keep the conversation to basketball. I'm going to try to stay focused on that. People were asking about it. Homer Simpson says, we saw you broke the news of Eli Holstein, the Alabama transfer quarterback, visiting this weekend. Any word on how that went? And all I'll say, Homer Simpson, is if there's breaking news during this live stream, we'll talk about it. And if there's not breaking news during this live stream, well, we'll wait a little bit longer into the afternoon. The Panther says, on a side note, I never thought I would say this, but I hope Pitt gets more games on the CW. It's a lot better than the ACC network. If you say so. I mean, you know what I'll say for the CW is I can get it with my digital antenna, but every time somebody in the house moves or there's a snowstorm, it gets a little bit dicey. So I probably prefer the ACC network because I can stream that, although that makes it way behind. So when I have the stat broadcast, like the official stat sheet on my computer, and my computer's like 3 baskets ahead of where my stream is, that's pretty annoying too. But at least I can see everything that's happening. Otherwise, hey man, shout out to Ryan Burr. I remember Ryan when he worked in Pittsburgh. Good guy, did a great job at Fox Sports Net, if you recall. Let's see. John K says the Diaz-Graham slam dunk was awesome. Yeah, that was pretty good. That was the kind of thing Zach Austin's supposed to be able to do, right? Driving and taking off from the foul line. I don't think Guillermo jumped from the foul line, but it looked like he did. Where was that? That was the 3:48 mark. Pitt was up 16 at that point, and he exploded for a dunk. That was pretty great to see. What did Guillermo finish with today? Let me bring up his stats. Guillermo had 5 points on 2 of 6 from the field. He didn't make any of his three-pointers, 3-point attempts. He was 1 of 2 from the free throw line. He had 6 rebounds and 2 assists. So not a bad stat line for Guillermo. A little bit of a drop from what he's had in the past few games, but he only had 1 turnover, 1 steal. He played 26 minutes. Jorge had, points-wise, a better game. He scored 8 points, but he only made 1 basket, but he was 5 of 5 from the free throw line. So that's pretty strong showing from him. Federico only played 14 minutes, had 4 points and 3 rebounds, 1 assist, and 3 fouls. 3 fouls in 14 minutes. So he was productive in that way, I guess. But Guillermo starting again at center. I have to imagine he continues to start there because it seems to be working. Let's see. Michael B doesn't think I read his super chat comment. Michael B, we got that right off the bat, man. We talked about it right off the bat about Jalen Lowe's minutes and whether. Oh, I don't know if I answered. The first question about whether or not Pitt will make a postseason tournament. Look, I think this team is still growing. Like I don't want a cop out answer on this. They have 10 wins right now. They're 10-5. They're 1-3 in the ACC. They got 16 conference games to play. 16 games to play. We've talked about 12 ACC wins being a number to shoot for. So that'll be 11 more wins. That will put them at 21. 21 wins heading into the ACC tournament. I still think that's probably what they need to shoot for. 11 or 12 conference wins. Can they do that? I think so. They've got a lot of winnable games out there. I think what's interesting to me is this team, I think will keep growing and keep getting better. I think Blake Hinson will get back to who he is, which I think he did today. But the key will be the continued growth and development of Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe. And as those guys keep growing and developing, I do think the team's going to keep getting better and playing better. People who keep saying, like, I just don't see this team going anywhere. They don't have any interior scoring. They were never going to have any interior scoring. Like, that was never going to be a big part of their offense. And they knew that. They knew that coming in. That wasn't a big part of their offense last year. They didn't have any interior scoring last year, and they made the NCAA tournament. They didn't have any interior scoring last year, and they were like in first place in the conference heading into the final week of the season. Interior scoring is not the issue for this team. It is an issue. They don't have any of it, but it's not like anybody's falling short of expectations. If anything, Guillermo Diaz-Graham is exceeding expectations, at least on the offensive end. Federico's not living up to I'd say he's meeting expectations on the offensive end. He's falling short of his expectations on the defensive end to the extent where they're just going with the offensive look with Guillermo, because if you're not going to get good defense out of Federico, what's the point? You don't get any offense out of him. So if you're going to give up something on the defensive end, you might as well have somebody who can give you some offensive, firepower. And Guillermo gives you a little bit of that more than Federico does. So it'll come down to what those guys on the perimeter can do and how they can grow and evolve. Me personally, I'm not worried about Blake Hinson anymore. I was worried about Blake Hinson for a while. I'm not worried about Blake Hinson anymore. I figured it would just take one game to convince me that he was back, and now he has had that one game, and so I'm convinced that he is back. So I would say, I'm not worried about that. The freshmen have to keep getting better, Carrington and Lowe, and then you're going to need Leggett and or Austin to be able to produce at a certain level on a consistent basis. And again, it doesn't have to be the 20 that Austin scored today. Although if you could get like 20 out of Austin and Leggett combined every game, you'd probably be in pretty good shape. But it doesn't have to be that. It's just got to be a consistent source of production and not just completely disappearing like Austin has done a lot of times. And like Leggett has done a fair amount too. You need those guys to give you something. And so is Pitt going to make a postseason tournament? I can't say that right now because I have an idea of what they need to do to make it. I have an idea of where they need to improve in order to make it, but I need to see them do it. I can't guarantee that Lowe and Carrington are going to keep getting better. I think they will because they've really shown improvement over the last 2 weeks. And so I think that'll keep happening, but I can't guarantee it. I think Austin and Leggett are capable of certain things, and they've been capable of those things at some point, at different points this season. But they have to show it. They have to, they have to do it. And so the pieces are there. The potential is there for a nice season, a 20-win season, a 21-win season in the regular season heading into the ACC tournament. But they've got a tough stretch of schedule coming up, and they're going to have to survive that, and they're going to have to avoid bad losses. You can't lose when Louisville comes to the Peterson Event Center. You can't lose to Florida State. You can't lose to Syracuse at home. to be quite honest. You got to beat Boston College. Like, you have to take care of the lower teams on the schedule. You have to take care of the quad 3, quad 4 teams. And then try to pick off whatever you can from the quad 1 and quad 2 teams. I think there are enough wins out there. There's enough possibility out there, enough potential out there. There's enough potential on the team, and there are enough potential wins out there. They just got to do it. Today, they did it. Today, they took care of business and got it done against Louisville, 83-70. Pretty good win for Pitt. Pretty good performance overall. And I think it was exactly what they needed to bounce back from the last 2 losses. Now, see how they do going forward. Thanks so much for tuning in today. It's been a lot of fun having our post-game show. Do it for about 45 minutes or so. I think we'll do it after most road games. These are fun to do. I enjoy getting together and talking about these games. We won't always have the bourbon out. Maybe just when they play Louisville, just to stick it to Kentucky bourbon because we like the PA bourbon. So, but Pitt wins today. They're 10-5 overall, 1-3 in the ACC. Back in action, I think on Tuesday night. I don't even have the schedule put up in front of me, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about it. Make sure you stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com. Going to be news throughout the weekend, I am sure. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, to never miss any of our Pitt video content. Morning Pitt videos, weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8 p.m., and these post-game shows that we'll do. Like I say, after every road basketball game, we do them after the football games. It's a lot of fun to do. I enjoy it. I hope you guys do as well. So, thanks again for tuning in. Thanks to all the commenters and all the questions and everything in the chat screen. Stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com throughout the weekend, and we will be back on Monday morning for a Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.